Hello, I'm George Liston, CA, and welcome to Dialogue, a program that explores the world of ideas and issues in international affairs, history, and culture. The subject of global warming and the environmental pollution that is its principal cause is garnering attention like never before. The prospect of environmental degradation and its costs will be a central theme in the presidential campaigns now getting underway in this country. One hopeful response to the uncontrolled growth of fossil fuel consumption is the substitution of cleaner burning agricultural alternatives. Among the most prominent of these is ethanol, and the Brazilian experience with this grain-based fuel is important to the world's hopes for environmental recovery. My guest is Marcos Jank, president of the Brazilian Institute for International Trade Negotiations. Marcos, welcome to Dialogue.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
It's a pleasure to have you, Marcos. Indeed, it's a great honor. Let me risk an assumption to start this. I'm very much a lay person, but it seems to me we could say, Marcos, that the age of cheap petroleum is over. The world is going to have to adjust to that, and the Brazilian experience with both ethanol and biodiesel fuel might be able to tell us a lot. I have heard that on the order of 45% of Brazilian fuel needs are now being met by ethanol. Is that correct, first of all? And in the larger picture, is this the answer to what the world needs? How far can this go?
It can go very far. We have a program that started in the 70s.
I know.
In the last oil crisis, when prices went up also very strongly. And since then, we've been moving in a very effective way. Sugarcane costs went down very strongly. And today, Brazilian ethanol is competitive to oil after $40 a barrel. So if oil prices are over $40 a barrel, we have a competitive product right now. But of course, it comes first of all because we produce ethanol from sugarcane, and sugarcane is today the best plant for ethanol and for sugar, and we've been developing lots of new varieties. And it's true today, 40% of the ethanol gas market in Brazil for light vehicles is supplied by ethanol produced from sugarcane.
Right. That's an excellent answer, Marcos. I really appreciate that. I want to talk about the use of sugarcane later in our conversation. But that does raise an interesting point, whether it's sugarcane or corn or whatever else. One of the big questions in this country, I know you know it very well, is the degree to which the production of ethanol affects agricultural production otherwise. For example, in the United States right now, a lot of ethanol is being produced by corn. And there's a lot of wonder about, how that's going to affect the price of corn for food products, for animal husbandry, and so forth. What's the Brazilian magic on things like that? I mean, what's the Brazilian response to it? In other words, having enough to produce fuel, but also making sure that your agricultural base remains strong.
The question is that in Brazil, the movement of production of ethanol was made through 30 years, and today we are using 15 million acres to produce sugarcane in Brazil, and only 7 million acres for ethanol. It's not very much.
Oh, really?
Here in the U.S., you have 78 million acres of corn, but corn have the exactly half of the productivity of ethanol per hectare.
As opposed to sugarcane?
Yeah, as opposed to sugarcane. So it's much less effective in terms of yields and also in terms of the energy balance.
Right.
Sugarcane produce 8 joules of energy for 8 joule of fuel, fossil fuel input. And corn is 1.4 to 1. So it's a plant that's not so fitted for energy. So we've been improving a lot our production, and I think that in Brazil we can expand sugarcane a lot.
Yeah.
Because we have, as I said, 14 million acres of land to sugarcane. 7 of that is for ethanol, but we have 150 million acres of land to agriculture. We have around 440 million acres for pastures,
Right.
another 200 million acres of available land in Brazil that's not used now. So we have room to expand without changing very much agricultural prices.
Right.
Here in the U.S., on the opposite side, what we learned from the conference we had yesterday here at the Woodrow Wilson Center is that the expansion of ethanol, corn ethanol, will have very strong effects not only on the corn prices, international corn price, but also in soybeans,
exactly,
in poultry, in pork. So here the cross effects are much stronger.
I'm glad you bring that up. For example, on the corn question here in the United States, there's some estimates that I've heard these from other sources that up to 20% of our corn production is going to being devoted toward ethanol. Some people think that could go to 50%, by next year, 2008. And in that case, we really got a big problem, with the other sectors being affected. But what I learned from you, and I think everyone listening and watching too at this moment, is that sugarcane is a much more productive source. Is that what you're saying? And you get more ethanol from identical quantities of sugarcane. Is that right, Marcus?
Yeah, and also costs are 30% cheaper in terms of the cost per gallon of ethanol produced. So sugarcane is the best plant for ethanol. And the best plant to produce biodiesel is palm oil, which is also a tropical plant.
That's
so
right.
this is a big opportunity for the developing world.
But I was going to say, this. We both know Brazil very well, but it seems to me that everything you said about the best sources, you could duplicate in Africa, Asia, many other places where there's a need. So this could be a very powerful tool for economic development.
Yeah, I think that we cannot leave the fossil world, which is concentrated in Middle East, very concentrated, and in some other countries like Venezuela, Nigeria, etc., to have only two suppliers of corn in the world, which is Brazil and US. We needed to expand, and the best way to expand is to stimulate production of ethanol from sugarcane in many countries in the developing world, and also from palm in also other countries. So this is a big opportunity for the world. Of course that we need to have, first of all, the equation of the efficiency.
I want to talk about all these things. First of all, before we even get to efficiency, something else you said at the start of our conversation, and also in your columns, which I've been reading, is fascinating to me. This is a problem the world's facing right now. What we're talking about, ethanol, is one of the solutions toward the future. But what's fascinating to me, Marcos, is that Brazil began this 30 years ago. And you mentioned the oil crisis might have been a motivating factor. But I'm curious about this, just in a few words. What made that happen? Why did Brazil have such foresight, to use that word, to begin heavily investing in ethanol at that time?
Yeah, this was very interesting. We had strong concerns on energy security in Brazil at that time. And we had this wonderful plant, which was sugarcane. And we decided to start a program. It was very subsidized in the beginning. We also had mandates to blend ethanol in the gasoline. The government had also a mandatory law that all stations should have a pump dedicated to ethanol. So in all 33,000 stations in Brazil, you find a dedicated pump just with ethanol.
From that time, way back? From that
time, from the end of the 70s. But what happens is that in the beginning, many people criticized Brazil because ethanol costs were higher than oil price, because we had a boom of prices in the 70s, but then oil prices went down in the 80s, and many people criticized the Brazilian program. But we continue to do that, and the ethanol prices went down very, very strongly in Brazil. And today, that we have a new level of price, and this is important. Oil prices move. There's a new level.
Right.
They used to be from 20 to 30 or 40, and now it's sure that oil prices will be from 40 to 60 or 70.
That's right.
So if oil price continue to be high, ethanol is an alternative, and especially ethanol from sugarcane, which is the most competitive product today. Of course, that you can develop ethanol from other sources. In this country, there's big expectations that to reach the 15% substitution of gasoline that was announced by President Bush, the 35 billion gallons of ethanol.
Right.
We cannot do that from corn ethanol. It's necessary to produce ethanol from other sources. Biomass ethanol.
That's once again, that comes through very clearly in this answer and the one you gave earlier, that we here in America would be very well advised to begin to get other sources than corn. I want to ask you a couple of other questions that are immediately stimulated by what you said. I really am impressed with the foresight Brazil displayed 30 years ago, and it's paying big dividends now. Was there or has there been a comparable development in the Brazilian automobile industry accompanying this? In other words, as a result of this kind of thing, has Brazil begun to produce the kinds of cars that make the best use of the fuel that's now available?
Yeah, this was the amazing thing that happened in our country. First of all, a very good plant to produce ethanol with possibilities to expand in new areas, what you don't have here in the States for corn, because here you have corn. If you expand, you go to soy or to wheat areas, there's not much to do. But there we can expand. We have lots of new areas that can be used. Second, we have these dedicated pumps to ethanol distribution. So in each gas station in Brazil, you find ethanol. Third, in 2003, the automobile industry developed what's called the flex fuel cars that can run with 100% gasoline, 100% ethanol, or any combination.
Any combination?
Any combination. It's just a chip you have on the car.
Oh, really? And right where the driver is, you shift?
No, it doesn't touch that. The driver just comes to the gas station, he looks the prices, and he decided if he will fill the tank with ethanol, gasoline, or and mixtures. Depends only on relative price. And because of the flex fuel cars, today we have a big consumption, more consumption in Brazil of ethanol on gas stations. And it's interesting, today the new cars in Brazil, 80% of the new cars sales are flex fuel cars.
Well, let me ask you something about that. If you're selling 80% of the cars are flex fuel, which, you know, that's extraordinary. That's the best possible use of the fuel that's available. Then the question occurs to me, and you're a trade expert, what's the exportability of those cars? Are they also going out to other cars, or is there a big potential for export of these cars?
The problem of adopting flex fuel cars worldwide is not the technology that makes them flex fuel, which is very cheap. It's not a problem. All companies are using that in Brazil, including Japanese companies and US car makers. They have flex fuel cars in Brazil. The problem is the distribution of competitive ethanol in gas stations, because as we have a competitive ethanol from sugarcane and we have pumps in gas stations, we can use flex fuel cars. In the US, you have two problems. First of all, your ethanol is not competitive compared to gasoline. It's competitive as an additive to gasoline. Today it's used in 2% of the gasoline, but it's not. If you sell full ethanol here in the States, it will be much more expensive than gasoline. And second, you don't have a distribution system for ethanol.
We don't, yeah.
So I think that in the U.S., the expansion of ethanol will be related not to flex fuel cars, but to mandates of blend in the gasoline.
You mean government mandates?
Yes.
About the
Yes. Today, some states here have mandates for 10% use of ethanol in gasoline, but the average in the country today is only 2%. But because of the expansion that was proposed by President Bush, we feel that the U.S. could move from 2 to 3, 3 to 4. But it depends very much also on really having competitive ethanol coming from agriculture, and it needs to be more than corn. It needs to find other
sources. Well, there are two things that come through loud and clear. Other sources than corn for the production, and strong government policy and mandate for the use, that these two things have to work together to make it go.
And also tax exemptions, because all things happen together normally. Tax exemptions, mandates, and also research to find...
Well, you add all these things together, and you're talking about a major government policy initiative, really. That's what it's based on. There's, as I say, I was reading a lot of your articles, and I find them very, very, as a layperson, they're very direct. I get a lot of information from them. One thing you wrote, Marcos, that really fascinates me, because we've talked about sugar cane as the ideal or one of the best sources. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in one of your columns you said it could be even more productive if Brazilians in this case were more acceptive of certain technologies which they resist. I was intrigued by that, and I kept thinking of the controversies we have here about, you know, modified foods and such. Is that the same thing? What's behind that comment?
Yeah, what happens there is that most of the improvement of sugarcane varieties were related historically to sugar production, and now we need to move that for ethanol production, and we have already research going on that could raise the productivity of ethanol per hectare in 30, 40, 50% if we use new GMOs, transgenic varieties, okay, genetically modified varieties. So this is one area where we could do.
Why do people resist it? I mean,
no, there's no resistance. It's just a problem of regulatory environment in Brazil. GMOs are not moving in Brazil, unfortunately. There is too much conflicts between ministries and with some groups of the civil society. So GMOs in general is an issue that's really stuck in Brazil today. But this is one area where we could do much better to have a cheaper sugarcane for ethanol. Another area where we could do lots of research, and this is one of the points that we are insisting that should be part of the U.S.-Brazil partnership agenda that will be developed. You know that President Bush will go to Brazil next month to visit ethanol plants, and also President Lula will come here. And one of the things we understand that should be on the agenda right now is a research cooperation to improve these products, not only in Brazil, U.S., but worldwide.
If you had to state in just one or two sentences what the impact or the promise of this Brazil-U.S. cooperation, what would you say? What's it designed to do in just the simplest statement?
In the short term is research and development,
joint research
and development, focusing first of all on the biomass utilization. So in the case of sugarcane, using not only the juice of the sugarcane to produce ethanol, but also the straw and the bagasse, which are very good material that could increase ethanol production, distribution systems, genetic improvement, standardization of ethanol in the world market, and why not, we should include also a discussion about market access. There's a tariff in the US that's very high, and we should include that.
Just clarify something for my viewers, Marcos. The bagasse, as I understand, is like grappa or something with the wine. So it's what's left. It's when you press the sugar cane, it's the stuff that's left, right? It's what is bagasse? How would you define it?
Yeah, what happens is that when you cut the sugar cane, you bring to the mill the bagasse and the juice. With the juice of sugar cane, you produce sugar or ethanol. And the bagasse, which is the cellulosic part, is used to burn and to produce electricity. But there is lots of possibilities to produce ethanol from the bagasse too, through hydrolysis. And this is one of the things that the U.S. is thinking now, not from sugarcane but from grass. Because the U.S. could use this huge amount of pastures area here to produce grass.
That's great.
And to produce ethanol. So we could do joint research in this area.
That helps me a lot, because you're saying that the biomass, there's a lot, research can give us even more productivity from that source. Speaking of another aspect of this, Marcos, and just a brief comment, I'm intrigued by the way, this all began 30 years ago, but it's fascinating to me the way Lula and as the president of Brazil and the government are making this happen and go on. Is it a fact that a lot of the sugarcane that's going into ethanol production is produced by small farmers, and that there's a kind of a social policy to encourage small independent farmers to be a part of this process, or has that changed?
No, sugarcane in Brazil is produced by 355 mills. And these mills, they have contracts. They have their own land, but they also rent land from some producers, and they also buy sugarcane from independent producers. So there's a very complicated contracting system where sugarcane comes. But I would say that in sugarcane you have thousands of producers also involved on this business, but probably medium and large scale producers. When you go to biodiesel, the idea of the Brazilian government is to concentrate on small farmers from the northeast part of the country.
That's what I was thinking of, because which is traditionally the most impoverished part of the country.
Yes.
To give them a stake in this production as well.
Yeah, it will take time, but Lula government is concentrated on the idea of producing biodiesel from castor seed, from also jatropha, which is another plant, from palm in the north part of the country. And the idea of the program is to be very focused on social aspects. But we needed to remember that even in sugarcane, and even knowing that that farmers are medium and large farmers, you have lots of labor in sugarcane because there is still labor to harvest sugarcane.
So it's very labor intensive at that level of production.
Probably the two agricultural activities that are more labor intensive in Brazil are sugarcane and orange.
That's
because
right.
the harvest is still manual in these two cases, but it's moving to mechanized harvesting. It's a sector that really is very important in labor terms.
Well, you know, and it's interesting because everything that you've said, as you mentioned earlier, about this labor-intensive new source of energy that could be a big answer to our pollution problems, happening in Brazil now could happen other places as well. That need it. And I think that's a very powerful message. And it leads me to this question, Marcos, because I know that with the trade focus of your institute, you obviously deal a great deal with international issues, and diplomatic issues as well. Does all of this kind of thing, does it have implications for the international posture of Brazil? The reason I ask this is, as I understand it, the United States, Brazil, and China right now are kind of the three biggest parties in this business of ethanol production and the potential for more. But is this make, and Brazil is already a big world player on the world stage, but is this make Brazil even more prominent in that way? There's a Brazilian message, so to speak, that will now be coming forth to the world about this very needed new product.
I think that what's moving in the world right now is the U.S. and Europe. That are worried about global warming, worried about energy security, and that's why they are expanding their programs. We expanded our program a long time ago, and right now what's new in Brazil is the huge use of flex fuel cars. So up to 3 years ago, our focus was our internal market.
Right.
Related to the adoption, very large adoption of flex fuel cars in Brazil. But suddenly the US decided to move from 7-8 billion gallons to 35 billion gallons, which is on the proposal of the president, and replace, according to the State of the Union address, 15% of the gasoline in the US. So this is a major modification that will change very much agricultural markets because of the role of the U.S. in this area. So what we can do together? First of all, what we can do is really doing research, consolidate the international market, help other developing countries. This is not only an opportunity for Brazil and South America, but also for Argentina, for Colombia, for Peru, for Central America, for the Caribbean countries. So we could do a lot of things together. There's also for example, today the possibility to export ethanol without paying the import tax from the Caribbean countries. There's a big opportunity for them to export up to 7% of the U.S. consumption with no taxation. I think that this should be considered very, very, very carefully here as an opportunity to be open to other countries.
Right.
The fossil fuel markets is completely liberalized. Why the renewable fuels market need to be protected?
Well, that's a great note for us to bring this conversation to an end. Marcos, quite frankly, I thank you very much. I mean, I think myself and everyone watching now understands this much better. And the main message I get from you is a message of hope. That is really good, that we can all profit from the wise development of this source. Marcos Jank, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
It's my pleasure.
I hope that you are going to build a very clever program for renewable energy in this country.
We will do that. Thank you. And that is our program. We appreciate your comments, and you can reach us at dialogue@wilsoncenter.org. I'm George Liston, CA, and you've been watching Dialogue, a co-production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and MHC Networks. Dialogue is also on the MHC Worldview channel, which is available to public TV stations nationwide. For more information, go to www.mhcworldview.org. Please join us again right here next week, and thank you for watching this week. Marcos, thank you again.
Next week on Dialogue.
Sir John Colborne was Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, and he was personally an abolitionist. But there was a considerable question about whether this was going to cause a diplomatic incident of some magnitude if he did not send the Blackburns back. This is the first extradition case between Canada and the United States over the issue of Canada's reception of the fugitive slave. And what Colborne did with his Attorney General was cook up what is the first piece of public policy regarding refugee reception in Canadian history. And the decision was that they would not be able to send the Blackburns back to the United States for trial, because whether guilty or innocent of the crimes of which they were accused of inciting the riot that rescued them, they would still become slaves for life.
Right.
And that was a punishment that could not be accorded under Canadian law. Therefore, they could not be returned to the U.S. jurisdiction. That